Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board Podcast. Season 4, we've got with us a special guest, somebody I met years ago when I was early in franchising, Zach Beutler. And if you don't know Zach, you will soon, but he's been around for a while, worked with 15 brands. He's been instrumental in opening about 5,000 territories. He's a co-founder, a founding partner of Horsepower Brands. You've probably heard of them. Also, Beutler Beef and a family man, got a couple of adorable little kids. He's anyway been a franchise owner. He's been around. So, Zach, tell us just a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll dive in and Horsepower as well, please, and then we'll jump into our topic today.
Yeah, I live in a small town in Nebraska, and I got started in franchising really young. I was when I was 18, I started working part-time at a nutrition store that the backstory was the gentleman that owned the top grossing GNCs in the country sold them back and started his own nutrition store line. And he wanted to franchise it. And I just, right place, right time, was a part-time guy. And then I think a gentleman moved to corporate and somebody else quit, and I became the manager by default. I'll never remember, I said, "How much does a manager make?" I think they said like 80 grand. I was like, "I'm in." And so I was good at that and did that for a few years. They opened up the first franchise location, and I went to the founder and I said, "Hey, you can make X amount on me as a franchisee or X amount on me as a manager." And they co-signed an SBA loan, and I moved to Tallahassee, Florida when I was 21 years old and opened my first franchise. And it was awesome. 1.3 million first year open, built it up to 7 locations in 3 years. And we had this $8 million revenue goal and end up just losing everything, filing bankruptcy, all came crashing down, which was perfect circumstance and timing. Ended up partnering with another franchisee. And again, another one of those negotiate. I think I had a $23,000 annual distribution for equity in future locations, and we grew that to 68 locations in 3 years, 40 million revenue sold there. And then I got into consulting and franchise development. And one of the first brands I worked on was Monster Tree Service, which is my business partner Josh Skolnick's first brand. And that kind of led down this path of over the next, I think, 3 to 4 years, we built a few brands, had some good exits, and then we launched Horsepower Brands. And today we have 8 franchise concepts, over 1,250 units, approaching 300 employees, another 6 or 7 entities that support the franchisees. It's kind of become a monster.
Yeah, no pun intended. Because it came from Monster, right? Essentially, that's
Right.
cool. Yeah, you're clever subconscious.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I mean, if you haven't heard of Horsepower, guys, I don't know what rock you've been under, but you guys are shaking up the industry and I think exemplifying some pretty cool behavior. That's cool. I mean, bringing marketing in house, doing some of those things. Like I think that you guys have got a good idea that's working well, and obviously you know how to pick brands, groom brands, and then get them ready for prime time, and then. Boy, they better be, because you guys are moving a lot of units and you've got great ops support on the back end. So, guys, if you're looking to model a multi-unit structure after something, this is a good one to look at. I'll just say that. So let's talk about the topic. So, Zach, he and I were hanging out at a franchise brand conference years ago, and I got to know. But I saw his post recently about mindful territory mapping. Reached out and said, "Hey, we need to record an episode about this." So, the concept today, guys, is and this is something I observe a lot. Emerging or even established brands, even brands that have been acquired, sometimes the territory strategy has not been very sound. And there are a couple of key areas where that causes major headaches. I mean, it essentially limits your ability to become royalty independent as a franchise owner. I've seen some that have made them set up things terribly. And so they're 200 units and barely turning a profit. That's a scary proposition to be in if you got to sell to survive. So our goal is to help you stay out of that mess and also avoid things that are going to result in limited revenue in major metros. I've seen big mistakes there as well. Zach has too. So we're gonna start digging into this topic. And Zach, tell us, like, what are some of the key mistakes you've seen people make when they start early on building out territory strategies?
Well, territory is interesting, and it's probably one of the harder things to do in the development process. Everybody has a different opinion. But I think where a lot of franchisors go wrong is they forget that territories are not what generate revenue. Placements generate revenue. And we talked a little bit. A lot of franchise brands are doing what's called multi-unit, where one franchisee buys 3 to 5, maybe more territories and opens that business. And what we have experienced in home service is somebody that buys 5 territories does not produce any more revenue in year 1 than somebody that buys 1 territory. And so as a franchisor, you want to build your brand across the country, build up the individual metro markets as much as you can, where you give franchising the chance to do what franchising does. And that's create more trucks on the ground, more national awareness, regional awareness that helps you with buying power, customer acquisition, systems and processes, et cetera.
I want to take you back a second because you said something that's very wise and it's a nice soundbite. You said territories don't create revenue, placements do. But some people might have the two interchanged in their brain. So help us delineate between a placement and a territory, and then let's talk about that itself. Like how do you manage that so it doesn't get out of place or out of hand? I mean,
Yeah. So on my back, most of my experience is in home service. So let's say that we award, and I think our at horsepower, our average territory to placement ratio is around 3.3 territories. So the average franchisee does around 3 territories. Well, when you think about a franchisee opening their business, if they buy 1 territory or 5 territories, the territory isn't what generates revenue. It's the sales rep, the amount of marketing dollars, and the equipment that generates the revenue. And somebody that buys 1 territory, typically, in my experience with most brands, starts with the same structure, people, marketing, and equipment as somebody that buys 5. And so you can't expect the additional territory to generate more revenue without those additional assets and investment of capital. Now, you look at the brick and mortar locations, someone that buys 3 to 5 locations, they typically open up 1 the first year, and there's a development schedule where it's 1 the first year, maybe another 1 the second year, 2 the third year, and the last 2 the 4th or 5th year. And the odds of them actually opening those other locations are going to be very slim to none. Yeah. And so, and as a franchisor, you have a duty to your franchisees to grow the brand, grow the level of support. And I was a franchisee, and I know what happens is you, as a franchisee, you get more mature, more educated, and you wonder, why am I paying all these royalties? Well, most of the time, the brand doesn't have the resources to add more support to maturing franchisees, and that's where that resentment starts to build. And so if you do it the right way, you can constantly reinvest in the brand, which provides more and more value as you grow as a franchisee.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I've seen a lot of brands, guys, that'll sell like 10 packs. Even I've heard of 20 packs, which is foolishness in most cases. Now, it does depend upon the concept, the investment level, what's required to own a territory. If you don't need equipment and the same, if you can cover 2 territories with the same staff, maybe. But what Zach's saying, I just want to call attention to, if you're building out a territory plan and you've got to evaluate a couple of things, but one is, what is the personnel and the equipment required? And if I sell a 5-pack a 5-pack to this person, are they capitalized enough to execute on deploying these 5 territories in that metro, or did I just lock up northern Atlanta? Well, go ahead.
This is something, Dave, that just drives me up the wall, and I'm going to do a little rant, so bear with me. At horsepower, we don't award more than 5 to anyone, and I don't care if you have $1 billion, have created 1,000 businesses, it's not happening. And what I know from experience in home service, as well as, well, we'll just talk home service for a second. In home service, the people with more capital, there's not a difference between performance and capital. So in home service, you can take franchisees, and just because they have more capital does not mean they're better operators. They're not the ones doing the work themselves. So they have to go out and hire other people that have to act like the owner. And so just because somebody brings all this additional capital in and buys 20 territories, there is not a single situation that I've learned today or can think of that, and there's no reason in home service that you should ever sell more than 5 for any reason, like period at the end, exclamation point, no reason. And if there was, I hope I get to hear what it is. But in home service, that's the one. Now, I'm gonna jump to the brick and mortar side. Like if we will, most likely never do brick and mortar, but if we did, I don't know if we'd ever do more than 3. To open up, I was a franchisee who opened up 7 businesses in 3 years, all in different areas and on a development schedule. And it was, if the franchisor would have sold each one of those locations to separate owners, they would have produced more revenue.
Yeah.
and it would have
Right.
built more awareness. It would have been, less, and I end up failing and losing everything. There would have been less risk for them as well. But you can oversell someone with the idea of building this empire. That's just not possible.
Yeah. Well, and even if it's possible, right? Go back to your previous point. Even if it were possible, you were capitalized well enough, you had the experience, the business prowess you had a management staff, a regional support staff, all the stuff in place to deploy. Having one person with 7 territories is less successful than 7 individuals who are going to work night and day to make their territory successful with 1 or 2 units, right? It just there's no way that
Well,
computes otherwise.
yeah, and so let's just take a random metro and say that there's 6 territories in that metro, and let's just use Columbus, Ohio. I think that's kind of around that area. We typically split that brand to east and west, 3 territory markets, and that's how we like it sold. And if we could do it 2, 2, and 2, we would, but 3 and 3 is how we prefer it. If you get 2 people that come into a market, they're both putting trucks on the ground, investing in advertising that go into that market that create better results and better odds of success for both locations. That is a powerful thing versus having just one person that opened it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I think you definitely, more territory does not equate to more revenue, and that's where I always say you want, like, at a lot of franchise brands talk about how many units they've awarded. For us, we're tracking placements. I really don't care about the amount of territories. I want to know the amount of placements.
Yeah, I hear you. No, but the placements equals human horsepower, right? And that's what you need to make a franchise run. Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah. Clever moment. Don't give me too much credit. But yeah, I love it. That actually circles back to your branding too. So, but I agree. So let's shift gears. So I think you guys get the idea. Difference between a placement and a territory. Placement is a human, right? This is the person that bought, as the entity that bought, versus just the number of territories that they buy out. Let's talk about territory sizing. This is a big one, and I've seen it done very well. I've seen it done very wrong as well. So, what are some things or mistakes you see people make when they're trying to design a territory?
Well, most of the time they're too big, and so a franchisor is typically a mom and pop business that built their business to a point to where now they want to franchise it. And how they built their business, their territory is, and we've done a lot of acquisitions, and one of them that we passed on, they had like a 4 million population territory.
Wow.
Yeah, you can't market to a market of that size. So if number one, you have to build a territory that's big enough for one territory to support a profitable business, and a profitable business that somebody would want to open and operate.
Yeah.
From a multi-unit standpoint, you would like a franchisee to buy multiple units with the hope of them developing it. Now, what I have a lot of conversation with candidates that can't get over the fact that, hey, I just want more. And I always try to remind them that you're most likely going to want to sell this business in 3 to 5 years, and you're not going to saturate that many territories in that time frame. Why would you spend money on dirt that you're not going to get a return on your investment from? And so as a franchisor, you want to build your territories that, number one, that one territory can be a profitable business that someone would want to own and operate. But B is a small enough footprint where they can create some density, where there's efficiency in the routing, where the GMB page or the GBP page can service effectively, and the marketing dollars can actually create enough touches. Now, each industry is very different. One of our strategies, we want services that are needed by all, with a lot of consumer demand. That creates a pretty similar territory size for us. But there are some concepts with really small territories that work, and some concepts that need bigger ones. But at the end of the day, as a franchisee, you want a franchisor brand that's growing aggressively, that's adding as many placements as possible, that create more annual revenue, which helps with buying power, access to technology. And the more people that get into the brand, the more best practices get produced that get distributed.
Yeah, that's a super good point. I'm glad you brought that up. You said something just a second ago I want to go back to. You're talking about getting a territory size that's small enough that it's optimizing density. And also you mentioned Google GMB, right? Google My Business listings. There are some interesting things about that a lot of people probably don't know. So I'm wondering, do you mind sharing a little bit about
so
this concept of density and how it helps the franchise grow?
So in home service, I believe it's PPC typically at the top, then it's sometimes GLSA, then it's the GBP page, which is the map with the businesses and the reviews, and then you have organic search below that. A typical GBP page goes about 2.5 miles in distance. So for you to be found, you're going to have people searching within that 2.5 mile radius. Now, some markets, some industries that are less competitive have a little bit wider reach. But if you sold somebody, let's just say, all of Salt Lake City, all of Provo, Utah, because I was just on the phone with somebody before. I know that's your neck of the woods. If somebody lives in the bottom of Provo, their GBB page is going to have a hard time ranking in North Salt Lake City. They're going to have a separate location. And one of the things that we still battle today, and I still am involved in every territory approval, is you take two markets that are separate serviceable areas, which means that they are different cities. There's a break between the cities. People typically don't leave that city to do a lot of their shopping. Where and you can use Lincoln and Omaha. There's Provo and Salt Lake would be another one. Those are separate serviceable areas where you preferably want a franchisee to service each one of those areas, not just sell them more territory and hope that they end up putting a location there. And so when you think about like a business owner, you're opening your business. If you have separate serviceable areas, that means that you have to have like separate phone numbers. You have a separate location for the GBP page. You're going to have a hard time commuting back and forth with labor sources. The relationships that you build are going to be different. And so you really want to focus on a single serviceable area.
Yeah, I love that. Because there are, and you chatted about this before. This is not my concept. Just want to make sure the credit goes where it's due. There is also more to it than just like serviceable areas, but also like geographically, there are things that make it wise to structure territories more rather than just around straight zip codes, around other things, right? You mentioned physical barriers and even like traffic zones that makes it wiser to structure territories around that. Do you mind sharing a little bit insight into that? Because I don't think many people think about territory mapping in that way.
Gosh, so my favorite quote is "Good decisions come from experience, and experience comes from bad decisions." The reason that our company is good at mapping is that we've made a lot of mistakes along our journey. And so when you think about dividing up a metro market, like let's just use North Atlanta, traffic in North Atlanta is miserable. And so if you take territories too far north and south, the odds of them even be able to get around during the day are impossible. And so when you look at like in North Dallas, like a lot of times we'll use the George Bush Turnpike as a guideline to territories. If there's lakes, for that franchisee to go across the lake where there's only one road that gets on the other side of the territory, which is technically another serviceable area, there's a lot of nuances in every territory that you going through the process thousands of times you start to learn when you work with candidates. And then when you make mistakes and then the franchisees have an issue, you're like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have mapped it like that. And then you go back. That's a learned skill. It's very difficult to teach, which is why we spend a lot of time for a brand pre-mapping the country to where those nuances are planned out. And another big thing that actually we didn't even talk about before this, Dave, was there are specific county rules and regulations that require certain licensing where you could have that location going to separate counties that have different licensing requirements or permitting requirements that are completely different, where then it makes sense to do more county lines.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and that might vary state by state, right? Some states get a little crazy where some are uniform across, right? They don't have new regulatory or permit laws based upon the county, but some counties do. That's a really good point. What are other things that they need to pay attention to? So permitting, licensing laws, other things that might change county.
Well, I think a big misconception in territory is that higher income are better zip codes, which is not the case. Different demographics different advertising campaigns will generate results in different population demographics. So I always talk about three variations of demographics. The first is if you look at low to middle income zip codes, you're going to find that direct mail, Angie's List, Valpak, traditional forms of advertising where offers can be generated, those typically work really well for those demographics because they're looking for more of a deal, or they're looking for that price cut, et cetera. If you look at middle to high income areas, they want more reviews and more referrals, and they want their neighbor John Smith to say, hey, I worked with this company, they were great, you should call them. And that works really well in referrals. And those are harder markets to break into when you open the business.
Mhm.
And then the third is more new growth areas. It's a 10-year franchise agreement. That population is typically going to grow. And when there's new growth, there's still existing opportunities that then get rehabilitated. There's commercial opportunities. And so you need balance of demographics and territories. And that's a big thing when, it's very difficult when you're talking to a candidate that can afford to buy a franchise doesn't spend a lot of time in low to middle income zip codes.
Mhm.
And so they immediately have a negative perception. And, our days go back to the painting concept, Dave. And I tell people in Omaha, if you divided Omaha up into 4 quadrants, the Northeast quadrant would be the lowest income, the ghetto. You won't want to go there at night. On our first $1 million revenue, 60% of it came from that quadrant. And so when you first open the business, it's important to have that balance to create a successful business. And each year you're going to have there'll be a different zip code that generates the most revenue.
Interesting. Well, you also have to pay attention though, too, right? You mentioned this, but we're getting out of territory mapping strategy, but like the marketing strategy has to conform to the consumer behavior in that socioeconomic district, that geographic district. So I appreciate that you shared that, because that's a deep insight that a lot of listeners here probably care about too. They may not be thinking about that, but it's okay to create territories, guys, as that, trust Zach, not me, right? That are crossing multiple socioeconomic sectors. You're darn right that you have to approach them differently, because different marketing, resonates better with different crowds. Even direct marketing, like doors and things like that, work better in certain neighborhood. If you're in an industry like some roofing and things, they'll go pound doors and chase storms. But you have to interact differently with people. Your territory strategy should conform with the marketing strategy too. I think that's a really brilliant way to think of it. Tell me a little bit about, you've talked about multi-packs, kind of how you feel about, it's way more important to get like people density rather than territory sold density. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's brand new in a home service or a general service type concept that they might not be thinking of, that we haven't spoken about yet? What are a couple of other key concepts that they should be thinking about
When it comes to mapping?
when it comes to mapping? Yeah, building out their territory strategy.
Well, a big mistake a lot of franchisors make in the beginning is they give away territory to get a deal done.
Mm-hmm.
Territory is, you're going to run out eventually. And our Mighty Dog brand, for an example, we're approaching 500 units across the country, 500 territories. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would have slowed down by now. And when we look back, we have a lot of available 3 and 4 territory markets that are still really good areas, because we were very strict on the mapping early on. And and we didn't deviate from the process. That allowed that brand and it is still, we're still having 4 or 5 placements a month. And so when a brand can get to that 700, 800 territories across the country and reach some saturation, there are some fantastic things that happen that the franchisees get to benefit from like I talked about earlier, better pricing wholesale wise, national partnerships. And so when you're a new brand, it's very difficult to understand how to map the country. And so you really got to find people that know what they're doing and get the advice, or pay for a service to maybe do some pre-mapping in certain regions for you. But you can ruin your ability to award several hundred units in the first 3 to 4 years just by improper mapping strategy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, and getting everybody, that's the holy grail, right? Everybody wants to get to sold out, no white space, and then we're just dealing with resales the rest of our lives, right? And helping people exit and helping people acquire and merge or whatever. That's a wonderful place to be, kind of the franchise nirvana state. But so giving away too much territory, what are other things that limit their ability to get to the point where they can actually get to saturation?
Well, if a lot of franchisees or candidates that come to the process, they want X, Y, and Z specific areas of the territory. Mm-hmm. If you just accommodate and give them whatever they want, for an example, you might give them all the high income areas in a metro, which does not make a good territory. Mm. Most candidates do want a territory where they live, and most people that can afford to buy the franchise are probably going to live in higher income areas. So if you just give away all the high income areas to one person, it's very unlikely you're going to have someone else that comes in that you're going to sell another territory to. And so, A, you have to be responsible about how you map it that creates results for the franchisee that opens their business. And B, you really got to make sure that you're doing the right thing for the brand to expand and let franchising do what franchising does, which is create brand awareness.
Yeah, so you bring up an interesting point. I haven't seen this, but you would. I don't have your perspective. So sometimes people will, let's say, the Salt Lake market. They're like, I want to buy the East Bench. I want to buy this neighborhood. They kind of Swiss cheese and pick and pack. So you're saying people like don't let people Swiss cheese a territory. Sell them contiguous, like things that are adjacent. So they've got a cohesive area that they're operating in. Is that more? Is that?
Yeah, well, they need to be contiguous for sure. But I mean, you can say out of that metro, you could map out of 6 territories, you could map 3, and then, well, there's still 3 left, but those 3 aren't going to be attractive to the next person. So when you're dividing up a market, you should have separate areas with similar demographics. I mean, they should have you ideally would like to have the new home construction, the middle, the high income, and the low to middle, and each territory needs to have those demographics. And so if you split up a 9 territory market into three territory opportunities, each one of those territories, or each one of those 3 territory markets should have similar demos.
I see your point. Yeah. So, but this again goes back into mindful mapping strategies, right? The whole purpose of this podcast. If you want to sell multi-packs, but you haven't done the pre-work to map out those kind of equivalent territory multi-unit packs, then when you start selling them, you're going to sell all over, right? Then I see your point, that you'll make a mistake there and then create unattractive territories. Oh, you got the south side of Chicago. It's all yours, buddy. That's all that's left.
Yep.
Like, no one wants to work Cicero, but there's money there, right? So, yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of times where even I today will get involved with some candid conversations where, to help them get over this fact of that they have this mind of what they think they want. And I still haven't remember a conversation with the Monster Tree franchisee when I was really early, where we did give away some territory, and this guy had to have this specific area. 2 years later, we ended up selling that area to somebody else. He didn't want it anymore. And so but having the conversations and being able to navigate through it to where you still create a positive outcome, and that's a skill that's developed, and that takes coaching. And if you don't have that, A, you need to find a developer that does, and B, you need to find someone that understands and can recommend the software to use as well as the pre-mapping strategy.
Yeah, so I'm curious. So I'm the guy, right? I say, hey, I really want these territories, and you know that what I'm asking for is a bad idea. How do you approach that as a franchise development professional? Because that's got to happen in that kind of selling stage, because they're working with a consultant, like a gentleman in your office. Let's say it's Anthony or something. How do you approach that conversation to help me understand that I've got to shift my paradigm because I'm thinking about it wrong?
Boy, this is great. So I'd say, well, Dave, we're not going to be able to do that for you, nor would you ever want us to do that for any cancer, including yourself. And so then you have to go through the different advertising campaigns and how different demographics are going to create success. And then you have to go into, as a franchisee, you want a neighboring franchisee that come in that has a good territory that can create more value within the region with you. And if you don't have that, then you're losing a big aspect of what franchising can do for you. At the same time, you can go into, they'll say, I'll never do work in any of these areas. I'll go to Google, I'll pull up the Google Maps, put the little person right in the middle of where they say, let's just spend 3 or 4 minutes and let's just do a little cruise around the neighborhood. Wow, this is a $90,000 Duramax truck parked in front of the driveway. You're never going to paint a house like this? Or this is look, there's somebody doing construction right here on this corner. There's things that are happening in those markets, but typically you're not spending time in those markets to see it happening.
Interesting. Now, I know you guys probably have great partnerships with a lot of the lead generators that are in the industry, right? So your Thumbtacks, your Angies, your Connect Pros, your other folks, right? Modernizes. Do you ever work with them to get general demographic information about where the leads are flowing?
Sometimes they help, sometimes not. The different manufacturers and distributors sometimes have data. Different mapping softwares can pull different data from different census information.
Yeah.
So there's typically 5 to 6 different sources that we use to help understand territory demographics, from age of the home to a number of contractors within a certain zip codes to even real estate and helping understand GDP selection.
Mhm. Awesome.
But sometimes you can get too much information and not just look at, there's like for roofing, there's homes with roofs that have to be serviced. What's a good territory? Well, different demographic, balanced demographics and roofs.
Yep. Age of home, right? That's your tell in the roofing. Yeah, you're a neighborhood that's getting to be like 18 to 20 years old. I'm guessing is like prime time, right, for you guys to hit. There's probably a number you don't have to tell me, but I know
there's a bunch of different scenarios, but I mean it's not easy to do.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, this is a great. I would love to dive deeper into that, but I thought of them because we partner with a bunch of them as well on the other end, right, to receive the leads and convert them. But they have a lot of good data, a lot of good data. They can tell you right now like where they're seeing the most demand for what service anywhere in the industry. So as a tip, build a partnership with people that have access to the data that can tell you where there's demand. You get into a conversation like that, there's an opportunity to say, look, here's real demand data. Like I've got a sheet of this territory. This is, in the month of December of last year, this is how many leads came through for this service in that area from this channel. I mean, compared to the territory you're asking for, I think you're missing the boat. If you get data, I find that people tend to respond well to that. It's objective. It's not subjective. Any other thoughts? I know that we're coming up close on time. So Zach, for somebody who's trying to figure this out and build it or even fix it, maybe we talk about that. Let's say you've done it wrong. What's some advice you can share with folks that have realized we made a mistake? How do you help them get on the right track as far as redefining territories?
I think the biggest advice I have to anybody is franchising is a small, close-knit industry that even competitors help each other. So reach out to people within the industry and ask, hey, who would be somebody good to talk to? And just reach out to and ask for help. And I think you'll be surprised at how much you'll actually get.
Totally agree with you on that. I've dinner with some of my competitors all the time. And I found it to be, I used to think that franchise fam hashtag people use as kind of bullcrap. It's not. Like you can approach anybody in the industry, have a conversation with them. And I've seen competitors at tables talking, painting companies talking to each other, commiserating about problems, sharing insights, because there's enough for everyone. And once you get that figured out, you'll be less afraid to approach a friend, a neighbor, a competitor, somebody in the industry that's figured it out, like a Zach, Beutler. And yeah, thanks for that advice, guys. Thanks for listening in. Don't forget to subscribe. Also check out Zach. Look at what Horsepower is doing. If you want some good examples that stand up and hold their weight in the industry, these guys are doing it right because, as you said, and I'm going to quote you again, good decisions come from experience and experience comes from bad decisions. So make those bad decisions, but then learn from them and pivot and go talk to people who've made them and maybe avoid some of them too.
100%, man.
Yeah. Zach, thanks again. Sure appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, boss.